All right, team. So that is a wrap. 2022 is in the books, and it was a great year. I read a lot of great books, and I'm excited to share 7 of the best books that I read in 2022. Let's get started. The first book on the list is by the Stoic philosopher Seneca. It's called On Anger. The Stoics are a really good source to learn how to relate to life's problems, and anger is definitely one of the universal problems that we all share. And the main point Seneca makes is don't act out of anger. That's the main idea. Anger isn't good or bad in and of itself. It's natural, but acting on anger leads to short-term bad decision-making that doesn't help us solve our problems. In fact, it often compounds our problems because we end up making decisions that aren't serving our interests. Anger is kind of serving its own interests, if that makes sense. For Seneca, the best remedy for anger is delay. He writes, "Beg anger to grant you this at first, to delay, not in order to pardon the offense, but that you may make a right judgment about it." Now, my main takeaway from the book is that anger could easily be the default way that we see the world. Throughout the course of the day, there's going to be plenty of times where anger is justified, and anger is really good at justifying itself. And the more we choose to give into those feelings, the more we're going to see the world through that lens. And so you have to ask yourself the question, am I a constant or am I a variable? Is who I am just like a reaction to the circumstances of the day, or am I basing my behavior on principles? And even more importantly, are those principles robust enough to withstand a little bit of friction? Or am I just using them as a mask to hide, insecurities and shortcomings that I have? The book is actually quite short. This is Seneca's collected works, and I'm still making my way through it. So that is On Anger. Let's move on. Next book on the list is The Doors of Perception in Heaven and Hell by Aldous Huxley. So I reviewed this book earlier this year. There's a link to all the full video reviews down in the description. But this book, page for page, is one of the best books I've read in a while. It touches on ideas and questions that are just like within the past 4 or 5 years, reemerging and beginning to get some traction in the world of psychiatry and psychology. Now, this isn't just a book about psychedelics. It's partially that, for sure. Huxley does a great job of taking you on the journey of his first mescaline experience, but it's also an investigation Huxley was undertaking of what the mind is and what consciousness is. And one of my favorite things that I learned from the book was a theory by the philosopher Henry Bergson, who thought of the mind as a reducing valve that most of the time is trying to filter out the information that's not useful for us. So you can think of it like there's an infinite amount of facts out there, and we're only experiencing a very narrow bandwidth of that at a given time. And psychedelics have the potential to kind of open that valve back up and allow us to experience things that are usually being filtered out of our awareness. I really enjoyed it. It's a great book, short. It's about 180 pages long. Doors of Perception, very good. All right, next up on the list is The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. So here's the thing. You can't honestly say that you disagree with someone until you've listened to their argument. I always say that communism is a beautiful idea with terrible consequences, and I think history backs me up on that. But the argument for ideas relating to communism and socialism, the arguments are becoming louder than ever. And if you're trying to understand those ideas, to me, the quickest path is to go straight to the source material. Everything else is kind of like a game of telephone that you used to play when you were in school. So the book, The Communist Manifesto is only 40 pages long, and Marx is very clear that he's speaking to the working class, and he's calling for a revolt against the bourgeoisie, the ownership, and more specifically, revolting against the institution of private property. That's the kernel idea of communism. He actually says, if you want to sum up communism in one sentence, that it's exactly that, the destruction of private property. And when I actually sat down and read the book, what stood out to me the most was just how much this movement was being driven by envy and resentment and revenge. It's not a book that makes you feel connected to other people. It doesn't inspire me to be a better person and reflect on my own shortcomings. It doesn't even give you the satisfaction that you've discovered a better point of view. The argument is, there's a group of people out there and they have more than I do, and that is justification enough to take it from them. And for that to be the foundation and the basis for a whole system of operating a society is devastating. And that's exactly what the system of communism produces when it's put into practice, devastation. So with that being said, I'm glad that I read the book, because now I understand where these ideas came from. And ultimately, that is the goal in reading, is to continually add to my understanding. So it was well worth the read. Okay, so book number 4 is Real Christianity by William Wilberforce. So I paired these two books together for a reason. These books, The Communist Manifesto and Real Christianity, were published roughly 50 years apart, so not very long. And they're both trying to address important problems in society at the time. Marx was focused on inequality in economics, and Wilberforce, on the other hand, was focused on putting an end to the slave trade in Great Britain. And he wrote this book essentially saying, hey, we think of ourselves as this great Christian nation, but we've completely lost the plot in regards to how the Bible says we should be treating one another. And my main takeaway from the book really crystallizes if you compare Real Christianity with Marx's approach in the Communist Manifesto. Both men were trying to address these difficult, important problems. Inequality is a problem. Racism is a problem. Selling fellow human beings as slaves is a problem. Those aren't difficult observations to make. But the question is, how do you go about addressing the problem? Marx's solution was to resent and envy people that have more than I do and take it back from them by any means necessary. Wilberforce's solution was to appeal to our common humanity and ask people to look within themselves and into their own hearts and their own genuine beliefs, and ask if they're living out the values that they claim to believe. And the effect of that is self-explanatory. Real Christianity, very important book in the history of the United Kingdom, the United States, and the world, moreover. Couldn't recommend it highly enough. All right, next book on the list is a great one. It's Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Y'all, this book is dark. It's gruesome, it's dismal, but it's great. It's a story about survival in the face of these hostile, hellish conditions in the desert. And there's characters, some of them just make your stomach turn whenever you read the book. There's a character called the Judge, who is this, elegant, cultured, graceful man. And he's also a guy that bashes babies' heads in and kills dogs. And he tortures innocent creatures just because he deems it his right to decide who lives and who dies. If you've read this book and you have an idea about what the Judge is supposed to symbolize, leave a comment, and I'd really like to know what you think about him. I'm not really making this book sound great. I'm kind of making it sound awful. But as dark as the story is, it's real. It talks about the struggle for existence in a place that has no inclination to bear life. And McCarthy's writing is top notch. I mean, listen to the way that he describes a shadow. Now here he's talking about a group of men riding their horses across the desert. He says, slant black shapes of mounted men stenciled across the stone with a definition austere and implacable, like shapes capable of violating their covenant with the flesh that authored them, and continuing autonomous across the naked rocks without reference to sun or man or God. Overall, it's just a great story. It feels like Dante's Inferno set in a Charles Russell painting or something. It's one of the best books that I've read as far as fiction goes all year, and I'll definitely be reading it again in the future. So, Blood Meridian. There we go. All right, next up is book number 6 by one of my favorite figures in the world of psychology, Carl Rogers. It's called On Becoming a Person. So Carl Rogers' view of psychotherapy was groundbreaking because he was the first clinician to kind of reverse the dynamic in the therapeutic setting. We all have that image of the psychologist who's an older guy. He's smoking a pipe, he's got spectacles, a tweed jacket, he's sitting in an armchair, and he's the authority. He has all the education, he knows what to do, he's supposed to be the one with the answers, and the client is there to kind of sit at their feet and seek advice and guidance. But Rogers had this completely different way of seeing that relationship. He wasn't this like highly cultured post-war intellectual type that distanced himself from his clients. He was raised on a farm, and he was a very accessible and open person. You know, he believed that imposing your authority on someone else is like the cardinal sin of therapy. He thought it was his role to be there to help. And the way that he thought he could do that most effectively was by listening to you with what he called unconditional positive regard. He was responsible for kind of pioneering the idea that listening is the like essential element to the therapeutic process. And I kind of agree and disagree at the same time. You know, on the one hand, I see where he's coming from. I think it's essential that we can talk with people that will listen to our experiences. On the other hand, you know, there's definitely people who will just talk to talk and who aren't introspective and aren't trying to connect, you know, with their better selves and correct their own behavior. You know, those type of people do need kind of a nudge, a little bit of guidance towards something better. So I need to think about that idea more and kind of fit it into the framework of how I understand therapy. But it's an absolutely brilliant book. You know, the best piece of advice that I took from it is whenever you're in an argument with someone, specifically, when you're in a relationship, you're trying to communicate, specifically when you're arguing, the best thing that you can do is to state the other person's point of view to their satisfaction before you can state your own side. And like that insight alone, you know, whether I'm talking with my fiance, my daughter, you know, anybody in my life, that, you know, made the book worth it for me. So Carl Rogers, On Becoming a Person. All right, and number 7 on the list is one of my favorite books that I read this year. If you follow my channel, which if you don't already, then I'd love for you to subscribe. But if you've watched my other reviews, you probably know that I'm a big Dostoevsky fan. I've read most of his books, except this one, and that's why I rounded the year out by reading Demons. Other translations of this, you might find it called The Possessed. They're one and the same. But this book is remarkable. Let me know in the comments if you want me to make a proper book review of this one. I'd really love to, because the story is so prolific in the way that Dostoevsky diagnosed a problem in Russia that took everyone else like 50 years to realize. He was warning against movements that promised to liberate humanity once and for all. And, furthermore, movements that will use any means necessary to bring that vision about. Marx's scientific communism was beginning to take hold in Russia at the time, and the characters in this book illustrate the evolution of those ideas as they're passed on from generation to generation. There's a great line that stands out in the book. It says, "Starting from unlimited freedom, I conclude by unlimited despotism." And there's another line in the book where the leader is talking about the followers of the cause. And he says, "I can get them to go through fire if I just yell at them that they're not liberal enough." It sounds like a book that was written today, but it preceded all of these ideas and social movements that we're dealing with now in America. And they're the same ideas and movements that Dostoevsky saw developing in Russia before the turn of the 20th century. And I reckon with that, that's all for now. That was 2022 in a nutshell. I'm currently putting together a reading list for 2023. If there's any books that you'd recommend, please leave a comment and let me know. Maybe I'll add it to the list and make a review on it. So take care, y'all. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. See you in the next one.